say one thing for children out there that are watching. They don't ever have to play professional, but they must love this game. If it's going to be from a fan standpoint, love it. Don't just be a fan. Love the game itself. Casey Stengels, the Babe Ruth, the Joe DiMaggios, and God bless his heart, Mickey Mantles, Willie Mays, they all came, and they're all gone. And I have come, and I'll be gone. Casey is the greatest, my favorite, and he's gone. But the game itself will always be here because the people, those people I named, they love the game so much.
He can't play for shit. Fans said that about a young infielder back in 1959. That player grew up to become Sparky Anderson, one of the greatest managers in baseball history. He won 3 World Series and earned a spot in the Hall of Fame. But Sparky carried a secret weapon that he used on almost every player he ever managed. He used big, bold words in public to build up confidence in his players. Sometimes those words turned good players into legends. The other times, those same words created expectations that no player could ever reach. Today we look at 7 players whose names got tangled up in Sparky's hype machine. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. Before we dive into the names, do me a favor. If you love baseball stories where the truth is a little messier than the headline, give this video some hype. It costs you nothing, and it helps us bring you more stories just like this one. Now let's get into why Sparky talked the way he did. Because the answer starts with one of the worst seasons any future Hall of Famer ever had. To understand why Sparky talked this way, you have to go back to his own playing days. In December of 1958, the Philadelphia Phillies traded for a young infielder named Sparky Anderson. They handed him the starting job at second base for the 1959 season. It should have been his big chance. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. Sparky played in 152 games that year, stepped up to bat 477 times. He only collected 104 hits. His batting average sat at just .218. On-base percentage was .282. His slugging percentage was .2049. Add those two numbers together and his OPS came out to .531. His OPS plus, a number that compares a hitter to the league average, was only 43. The A score of 100 is supposed to be average. The Sparky was nowhere close to that line. He did not hit a single home run the entire season. Not one. He drove in 34 runs. He struck out 53 times and walked 42 times. By the time the year was over, his wins above replacement sat at -1. 2. That kind of number means his team would have been better off with almost anyone else playing second base every day. Got worse before it got better. The brutal slump dropped his batting average all the way down to 163 by the middle of May. He went 6 for 56 during one stretch that felt like it would never end. Fans in Philadelphia were not gentle about it. The Phillies were a last-place team that year, and the crowd let Sparky hear about it on opening day and on every day after that. There was no extra coaching to help him fix his swing. There was no organized practice built around getting better. He was simply left alone with his struggles, standing in front of a crowd that booed him without mercy. After that season ended, he went back down to the minor leagues. He never made it back to the major leagues as a player again. But that miserable year changed him forever. He decided that if he ever became a manager, he would do things differently. He would keep his office door open to every player on his roster. He would back his players in public no matter what was happening on the field. He would build up their confidence instead of tearing it down the way the boos in Philadelphia had once torn him down. Nobody had warned him the major leagues could feel this lonely. He had pictured cheering crowds, not boos raining down on him night after night, with nobody standing up to defend him. A man named Jack Kent Cooke, who owned the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball club at the time, noticed something special in the way Sparky led people, even while Sparky was still struggling as a player. Cooke pushed him toward managing. Sparky took that path and he never looked back. His loud, confident praise was never some act for the cameras. It came from real pain. He knew exactly what it felt like to be exposed in front of a crowd with nobody defending him. So once he became a manager, he made sure his own players never had to feel that kind of alone. The trouble was, the same tool that protected his players also quietly set traps for them. The big words create big expectations, and expectations do not care one bit about a person's feelings. By 1970, Sparky was leading the Cincinnati Reds. In his very first year as their manager, his team won 102 games and captured the National League pennant. This was the start of the Big Red Machine, one of the most powerful teams baseball had ever produced. The roster included Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, and Tony Perez. These four men were true superstars, no exaggeration needed. Before spring training in 1975, Sparky called his whole team together in one room. He told them something blunt and direct. He said there were only four real stars on this entire roster: the Rose, Morgan, Bench, and Perez. That was the list, and nobody else made it. Then he turned to everybody else in that room. He told the rest of the players that their job was simply to support those four stars. He used a much rougher word than support, though. He called them turds. It was harsh, but it had a real purpose behind it. Told every role player exactly where they stood on this team. It took pressure off of them, because nobody on the outside expected them to suddenly become superstars overnight. At the same time, it locked in the pecking order of the clubhouse without leaving any room for confusion. Most of those role players never complained about the harsh word he used. The Sparky's blunt honesty in private felt fair to them, even if the word itself stung a little, because at least nobody was confused about where they stood on that roster. This story matters because it shows Sparky was never fooled by his own hype. In private, behind closed doors, he knew exactly who his real stars were and who they were not. In public, standing in front of a reporter's notebook, he could turn a backup infielder into the next legend with a single well-placed quote. He understood the difference between the truth that lived inside his own clubhouse and the story he wanted printed in tomorrow's newspaper. The utility infielder named Doug Flynn played for Sparky on both the Reds and later the Tigers. The Flynn was a steady glove man, nothing flashy, the kind of player every winning team needs but few fans ever talk about. The Sparky actually let him go twice over the years, once from each team. Years later, the Reds held a ceremony outside their ballpark to put up statues honoring the stars of the Big Red Machine. The Flynn was there that day, standing and looking up at all those bronze figures of Rose, Bench, Morgan, and the rest of the gang. He joked to the crowd that there they were, ladies and gentlemen, the 8 most overrated players in baseball. It got a big laugh, but it landed on something true underneath the joke. The gap between what Sparky said about his players in public and what those players actually did on the field could be wide enough that even the players themselves were able to joke about it years later. The Sparky's hype machine did not always create big reputations by accident. Sometimes it grew out of a calculated plan to manage people first and to manage a baseball game second. Now it is time to count down the 7 names most tangled up in that hype machine. We will start from the bottom and work our way up to the biggest name of all. The number 7, Dan Dreesen. After the one-time 76 season, the Reds traded away Tony Perez, one of their 4 real stars from that famous speech. That move left a hole at first base that somebody had to fill. Dan Dreesen stepped into that spot. The Sparky needed Dreesen to feel ready for that kind of pressure right away, so he gave him a giant compliment to lean on. He told reporters that Dan Dreesen might be the best hitter of them all on that Reds roster. Stop and think about what that really means. The Reds roster at that time still included Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, and Pete Rose, 3 future Hall of Famers standing in that same clubhouse. The Sparky was saying Dreesen might out-hit all 3 of them with a bat in his hands. That kind of praise does not disappear once it is said out loud. Reporters wrote it down word for word. Fans repeated it to each other at the ballpark and on the radio. Suddenly, Dan Dreesen was not just a first baseman trying to do his job in peace. He was a man who now had to live up to a sentence that no normal player could ever truly match. Dreesen went on to have a long and steady career. He played 15 seasons total in the major leagues. He collected 1,464 hits along the way. He hit 153 home runs. His career batting average landed at .267. Those are the numbers of a solid, genuinely useful big league player who stuck around for a long time. They are not the numbers of someone who out-hit Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, and Pete Rose combined. Cincinnati fans never fully let it go. They had heard Sparky say their new first baseman might be the best hitter of them all, so every season that Dreesen did not turn into a towering superstar felt like a letdown to them. It did not matter that .267 with 153 home runs over 15 seasons is a respectable career by almost any normal measure in the sport. It only mattered that it was not what Sparky had promised them on day one. The Dreesen rarely complained publicly about any of this, which only made the unfair comparison easier for fans to keep repeating year after year. This is the cost of the hype machine in its purest, simplest form. Dan Dreesen was never broken as a baseball player. He was simply handed a promise that he could never possibly keep, and he spent years quietly carrying the weight of words that were never really about him in the first place. Those words were about protecting a roster, calming nervous fans, and filling a gap that Tony Perez left behind when he was traded away. Driehasen just happened to be standing in that spot when Sparky decided to say them out loud. That brings us to our next name on this countdown. A player his own teammates swore belonged in Cincinnati's biggest spotlight of all. Number 6, Dave Concepcion. Dave Concepcion played shortstop for Sparky during the entire run of the Big Red Machine dynasty. On the field, he was brilliant in a way that highlight reels still show today. He is often credited as one of the players who helped invent the turf hop throw, a trick where a shortstop bounces the ball on purpose so that it skips faster across artificial grass on its way to first base. It took real skill and real nerve to use a bounce on purpose instead of throwing a clean, normal line to the bag. His own teammates loved playing next to him. Johnny Bench and Tony Perez both argued loudly and often that Concepcion belonged in the Hall of Fame someday. They believed he stood right up there with Barry Larkin, another great Red shortstop who later did make it into the Hall of Fame. Teammates also pointed to his calm leadership in the infield, the way he organized the defense and steadied younger players during tense moments late in big games. But not everybody agreed with that praise. The writers and analysts who studied the deeper numbers saw a different picture forming. Concepcion finished his 19-year career with 2,326 hits, 101 home runs, and a batting average of .267. Those are fine numbers for a long, durable career, but they do not jump off the page the way a true Hall of Fame bat usually does. His on-base numbers and his power numbers simply were not at the same level as the players his own teammates kept comparing him to. This turned Concepcion into a symbol of a much bigger fight happening inside baseball at the time. On one side stood the old-school view, the same view Sparky himself believed in deeply. That view said defense, leadership, and clutch moments in October mattered just as much as the numbers printed on the back of a baseball card. On the other side stood a newer way of thinking, built on careful math and deeper stats, that said total value across a full season matters more than reputation built on a few big plays. Concepcion was never a bad player, not even close. 19 seasons in the major leagues is proof enough of real talent and real toughness on its own. But the gap between how beloved he was inside his own clubhouse and how his numbers looked once analysts started measuring them carefully made him one of the toughest cases in this entire story. His reputation grew bigger than his statistics could fully support on their own. And once the analytics crowd started looking closely, that gap became impossible for anyone to ignore. Next on this list is a name that proves Sparky's hype could reach a player wearing a completely different uniform. The number 5, the Bob Knepper. This next name is a little different from the others, because Bob Knepper never even played for Sparky. He pitched for the San Francisco Giants the whole time, but Sparky's hype machine had a way of reaching across the entire league, not just inside his own dugout. In 1978, Sparky publicly praised the Giants' pitching staff as the best in all of baseball. He singled out Knepper, a young left-hander, calling him their best pitcher on the entire staff. The other voices jumped in right behind him. A former Giants pitcher named John Montefusco said Knepper might be another Sandy Koufax, one of the greatest left-handed pitchers who ever stepped on a mound. The Montefusco even called him a sure thing for 25 wins in a single season. For 1 year, the praise actually looked fair. In 1978, Knepper won 17 games with an ERA of .263, a very strong number that shows he kept runs off the scoreboard almost every single time he pitched. For a moment, it really seemed like the hype was about to come true. Giants fans started talking about him the same way fans talk about a true ace, someone who could carry a pitching staff all by himself for years to come. Then 1979 happened. The Knepper's team lost 91 games that season, and his own performance fell apart right along with the rest of the roster. His career turned into something unpredictable from that point forward, with strong stretches mixed in with rough collapses that nobody could fully explain. The sports writers stopped comparing him to Sandy Koufax and started calling him terribly overrated instead. By the time his career finally ended, Knepper had pitched 1433 innings, won 150 games, and posted a career ERA of .368 across 15 total seasons. Those are the numbers of a useful, durable starting pitcher who stuck around the major leagues for a long time. They are nowhere close to Sandy Koufax territory, and they were never going to get there. What makes this story important is that Sparky's words did not need to come from inside a clubhouse to do real damage. A big public claim from a famous manager, repeated by other players and printed by sports writers, was enough to set a trap for a man who never even wore a Reds or a Tigers uniform in his life. Once the Koufax comparison was out there in print, every bad outing made Knepper look worse than he really was, simply because the bar had been set somewhere near impossible to reach. Moving up the list now, we come to a hitter whose raw power never quite matched the steady label Sparky once gave him. The number 4, the Mike Ivy. The Sparky spent years trying to get his hands on a player named Mike Ivy. The Ivy was loaded with talent and real power at the plate, but he also struggled with the heavy pressure that came with playing professional baseball at the highest level. That pressure followed him through most of his career. When Sparky studied Ivy's swing closely, he came up with a comparison that was meant as a real compliment. He said Ivy had the hitting mechanics of Steve Garvey. Garvey was known across the entire league as one of the most steady and reliable contact hitters in the National League. Saying a player swung like Garvey was supposed to mean that player would hit for a high average year after year, without much drama attached to it. The problem is that mechanics are not the same thing as results on the scoreboard. The Ivy had plenty of natural power, in some ways even more raw ability than Garvey himself carried, but he never found the steady consistency that made Garvey such a valuable, reliable presence in a lineup. He also never found the emotional stability needed to handle the daily grind of a long major league season. Teammates often described him as a kind, gifted man who simply carried more weight on his shoulders than the game usually asks of anyone. The over 11 seasons, Ivy collected 651 hits, 81 home runs, and a career batting average of .269. Those numbers describe a useful player with real pop in his bat, not a steady, high-average machine like the man Sparky compared him to that day. The comparison to Garvey, did Ivy no real favors over the years? Every time his average dipped or his confidence wavered in front of a crowd, fans and writers had a name and a standard sitting right there to measure him against. Instead of being judged simply as Mike Ivy, a talented but inconsistent hitter trying his best, he was constantly judged against a label that never quite fit the man swinging the bat. The mechanics may have looked similar from the outside, but the player underneath carried a different set of struggles that no clean comparison could ever fix. This next name on our countdown carries maybe the saddest twist in this entire story. The number 3, Chris Pitaro. Of all 7 names in this story, this might be the single most painful example of the hype machine going wrong. During spring training in the mid-1980s, Sparky became completely enamored with a young infielder named Chris Pitaro. The Sparky did not hold anything back. He told everyone who would listen that Pitaro was the best rookie he had seen in 15 years. Then he went even further than that, saying Pitaro's future stardom was etched in cement. The etched in cement is about as strong a guarantee as any manager can possibly give a young player. It is not a hope. It is not a maybe. It sounds like a promise carved permanently into stone that nothing should ever be able to break. The cement cracks faster than most people think, though. The Pitaro struggled badly once real major league pitchers started throwing him sharp breaking balls in live competition. The swing that looked so smooth and easy during spring training simply fell apart once the regular season started for real. The Tigers eventually traded him away to the Minnesota Twins. His major league career lasted only 3 seasons in total. When it was all over, he had 41 career hits, 3 home runs, and a batting average of .35. Those numbers are not the resume of a future star. They are the numbers of a player who simply could not make the jump that Sparky had promised in front of reporters that he absolutely would make. The few moments in this entire story show the danger of Sparky's hype machine more clearly than that single phrase, etched in cement. The words meant to lock in confidence instead became a measuring stick that Pitaro could never reach, no matter how hard he tried. The cement that was supposed to hold up his whole career ended up cracking within a single season, leaving behind a label that followed him long after his bat was already put away for good. Now we reach a name that shows just how far one single comparison can stretch beyond what any player can actually deliver. Number 2, Barbaro Garvey. This next case shows the widest gap between what Sparky promised in public and what actually happened on the field. Barbaro Garvey was a Cuban utility player who survived the 1980 Mariel boat lift before making his way into professional baseball in America. He had real contact skills at the plate, but he did not have elite power, and he did not have one clear position he could truly call his own on defense. None of that stopped Sparky from making a massive claim about him anyway. He called Garvey the next Roberto Clemente. The Clemente was a true legend, a Hall of Fame outfielder remembered as one of the greatest all-around players the game had ever produced in its long history. Putting Garvey's name right next to Clemente's set an impossible standard before Garvey had even finished playing a full season in the major leagues. To be fair to Garvey, his rookie year was genuinely useful to his team. He played a real role on the 1984 Tigers team that went all the way and won the World Series that year. But his entire major league career only lasted 3 seasons in total. There was no second act for him, No slow rise toward the kind of legendary status that Sparky's words had promised reporters and fans alike. Once his short career ended, critics looked back at the Clemente comparison and used it against him without much mercy. Instead of remembering Garby simply as a useful piece on a championship team, many fans only remembered the broken promise of stardom that never actually came true. The comparison did not lift him up in the long run at all. It gave critics an easy target, a simple way to label a serviceable role player as a failed superstar instead. Out of all 7 names in this story, Garby's case shows just how far Sparky's hype could stretch beyond what any player could realistically deliver, and how unfair that stretch could feel once the TV cameras moved on and the championship parade was long over. And now we arrive at the biggest name in this entire story, the one Sparky compared to the biggest legend of them all. Number 1, Kirk Gibson. When Sparky took charge of the Detroit Tigers, he looked at a young outfielder named Kirk Gibson and saw the future engine of his entire offense. He wanted Gibson to play every single game with fire and total confidence, so he reached for the biggest comparison he could possibly find. He called Gibson the next Mickey Mantle. The Mickey Mantle is one of the most famous names in all of baseball history. A true Hall of Fame legend remembered as one of the greatest switch hitters who ever stepped onto a field. Telling a young outfielder he was the next Mickey Mantle was not a small, friendly compliment. It was about as large a promise as any manager could possibly make to a player still trying to find his footing. To his credit, Gibson went on to build a genuinely great career for himself. He won the National League MVP award in 1988. He delivered postseason moments that fans still talk about decades later, both with the Tigers and later with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The over 17 seasons, he collected 1,553 hits, hit 255 home runs, and finished with a career batting average of .268. Even casual fans who never watched him play still know his name today, which says something about how memorable his best moments truly were. Those are the numbers of a true star, a player who earned every single bit of respect that he received along the way. But they are not the numbers of Mickey Mantle, and honestly, they were never going to be. No player in all the years since Mantle retired has truly matched what he once did on a baseball field, and it was unfair to measure any young outfielder against that exact standard before he had even played his first full season in the league. The comparison followed Gibson everywhere early in his career. Every slump, every quiet month, every stretch where he simply looked like an ordinary good player instead of a living legend, got measured against the ghost of Mickey Mantle standing right behind him in every headline. Reporters brought it up again and again, year after year. The fans expected Mantle-level greatness on a nightly basis from a player who was, in plain truth, simply very good and nothing more. This is the clearest example in the whole story of what Sparky's hype machine could do at its most extreme. Kirk Gibson was never a disappointment. Not for one single second of his career. He was a real star with real championship moments that fans still celebrate today. But by handing him the name of one of the greatest legends the sport has ever known, Sparky made sure that anything short of total all-time greatness would feel to a lot of people watching from the stands like falling short somehow. The Sparky's warm public praise did not mean he was a soft or easy manager once the cameras turned off. In fact, the opposite was closer to the truth. While he poured out compliments to reporters in the hallway, he ran his pitching staff with a hard, quick hand inside the dugout. He earned a nickname for this exact part of his job. People around the league started calling him Captain Hook. The name came from how fast he pulled his starting pitchers out of games at the very first sign of trouble. The moment a pitcher showed even the smallest crack, Sparky was already walking out to the mound to take the ball away from him. He leaned hard on his relief pitchers instead, especially 2 men named Will McEnany and Raleigh Eastwick, who handled the final innings of countless important games for him over the years. Starting pitchers learned fast that a few shaky pitches could end their night early, no matter how loudly the home crowd begged for them to stay out there on the mound. This same firm hand showed up just as clearly in how he ran his clubhouse off the field. The influenced heavily by Reds general manager Bob Howsam, Sparky demanded a clean, sharp look from every single player on his roster. Short hair, the shiny shoes, the sports jackets and ties whenever the team traveled on the road, there was very little room for personal style or self-expression anywhere in his world. One of the hardest losses of his entire career came during the 1972 World Series, when his Reds fell to the Oakland Athletics in a hard-fought series. It was not only the loss itself that stung him so deeply, it was also who beat them. The Athletics wore long hair and thick mustaches. The exact opposite of the buttoned-up, clean-cut look that Sparky demanded from his own players every single day. Losing to a team that broke every single rule he believed in cut especially deep for him. This rigid discipline cut both ways throughout his long career. It built a clear, obedient team that won championships together season after season. But it also pushed away some players who saw the dress code and the strict hair rules as old-fashioned control for the sake of control. Nothing more useful than that. The Sparky himself once said something blunt about this exact part of the job. He said a player did not need to like him and did not need to respect him as a person at all. The A player only needed to obey him on the field and inside his clubhouse. Put this side by side with the warm, glowing words he handed out to reporters, and a very different picture of Sparky starts to come into focus. He was not simply a kind old man handing out compliments because he could not help himself. He was running a calculated operation the whole time, using praise as a tool in public and strict control as a tool in private, both aimed at the exact same goal of winning as many baseball games as humanly possible. After everything in this story so far, it would be easy to walk away thinking Sparky only ever cared about control and image. The spring of 1995 proved that idea was not the whole truth about who he really was. Major League Baseball found itself in the middle of a brutal players' strike that year. The team owners came up with a plan to use replacement players, sometimes called scab players, just to keep games running on schedule without the real major leaguers taking the field. The most managers around the entire league simply went along with the plan. The Sparky refused outright. He said flatly that there was no place in this game for replacement players, full stop. To him, putting his own name on a lineup card filled with replacement players would have betrayed everything baseball stood for, and everything he himself had given his whole life to the sport in return. That decision came with a real, painful price tag attached. Tigers owner Mike Ilitch placed Sparky on unpaid leave simply for taking that stand. It cost him $150,000 in lost salary that year alone. Team president John McHale eventually managed to talk Ilitch out of firing him completely, which would have caused a major public relations disaster for the franchise. Still, the damage done to Sparky's relationship with team ownership never fully healed after that spring. The respected sports writer Tom Boswell even predicted at the time that Sparky would end up blackballed across the entire sport for taking such a public stand. While there was never a formal written blacklist anywhere on paper, the many people close to the game believed team owners quietly remembered that Sparky was willing to turn against his own bosses whenever his personal beliefs were truly on the line. Despite all of that real cost, Sparky always called this stand one of the proudest moments of his entire career in baseball. He gave up real money, and he risked his own standing with the very people who employed him simply because he believed defending the integrity of the game mattered more than protecting his own paycheck that season. Players across the league took notice of his stand, and many of them came to respect him even more once the strike finally ended, and real baseball returned to the field. This moment matters so much in this story because it proves Sparky's flaws never came from emptiness or greed of any kind. The same man who built up players with exaggerated public praise and who ruled his clubhouse with strict old-fashioned discipline was also a man fully willing to sacrifice real money and real standing for a principle he truly believed in. His hype machine grew out of a deep loyalty to his players. 1995 stand grew out of an equally deep loyalty to the game of baseball itself. The Sparky's own career began winding down right as baseball itself started to change underneath him. In the 1980s, a writer named Bill James started publishing detailed books called Baseball Abstracts. James introduced brand new ways of measuring a player's true value, built on careful math instead of simple gut feeling and old-fashioned habits passed down for generations. The most managers of that era brushed these new ideas aside completely without a second thought. Sparky was different from almost all of them, along with another respected manager named Earl Weaver. He was one of the very few established leaders in the game who was actually willing to sit down and talk through what these new numbers might really mean for the sport. It was a surprising habit for a manager who had built his entire reputation on gut feeling, bold speeches, and dramatic comparisons rather than spreadsheets full of careful math. This shift in thinking explains a lot about why a player like Dave Concepcion became such a hot topic for debate years after he retired. Traditionalists, including Sparky himself, valued his defense, his leadership, and his big moments in October above almost everything else a box score could ever show. The newer wave of number-crunching analysts looked instead at his on-base percentage and his lack of real power, and they came away far less impressed by his overall career. That single divide, old-school feeling against new-school numbers, sits quietly at the center of almost every name in this entire story. The Sparky's praise was never really about lying to anyone on purpose. It was a tool, built out of his own painful memory of being booed and abandoned as a young player back in Philadelphia. He used loud, confident words to protect the people in his care from ever feeling that exact same kind of pain again. but words echo long after they are first spoken out loud. The same praise that helped a nervous rookie walk onto the field with his head held high also became the exact measuring stick used against him years later. Long after Sparky had already moved on to praise somebody else entirely. He remains one of the greatest managers the sport has ever known, a three-time World Series champion, and a true Hall of Famer who earned every single bit of his place in the game's long history. He believed in people more deeply than almost anyone else who ever managed a baseball team. And that deep belief helped him win real championships that still matter today. Players who struggled elsewhere found a home in his clubhouse, simply because he refused to give up on them in public, even on their worst nights. But belief, once it gets loud enough, can quietly turn a good player into a legend that never actually existed in the first place. That is the strange and lasting legacy of Sparky's hype machine, the same machine we have followed through 7 different careers today. It protected his players in the exact moment they needed it most, when confidence mattered more than almost anything else on a baseball field. And it left some of them carrying labels, comparisons, and promises they never actually asked for, long after the cheering inside the stadium had completely faded away into silence. That is the true story behind the man, the legend, and the hype he built with his own 2 hands.